You are now tuned in to the Worldwide Underground. I'm your host, Gabriel Teodros, and it's been a minute since the last episode. We had New Year's, we had birthdays over here. We went to Chicago for the People for Gaza event, and joining Ijoma and myself in Chicago was none other than my guest on the podcast today, Nikkita Oliver, aka K.O. Nikkita. Incredibly talented poet, MC, vocalist, a boxer, an attorney, community organizer, visionary. They help lead one of my favorite organizations in the city, Creative Justice, and they had an historic run for Seattle mayor back in 2017. They almost won the whole thing. Came shy of the primaries by, less than 2,000 votes? Very excited every time I get to share space with Nikkita Oliver. I wanted to have Nikkita on the podcast this week in particular because on Monday, the organization that Nikkita works with, Creative Justice, takes over the cafe at Washington Hall. There's a grand opening this Monday. That's Martin Luther King Jr. Day here in Seattle, Washington. And they have a very specific intention to honor my dear friend Rawa Hapte, Hidmo, the Hidmo legacy. And I wanted to talk about all of that. Nikkita said if there's one thing they hope you get from this podcast is to know the value of our collective stories and our collective legacy. Hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. One time I want to thank everyone who supports the Worldwide Underground. If you want to sign on to the mailing list, the best way to support all the work that we're doing here on the Worldwide Underground, all you got to do is head to gabrielteodros.substack.com, put your name on the list. You can also put up on the podcast at any amount that feels good to you. This is a completely independent venture. It's powered completely by our listeners, by our community, and we thank you all so much. With no further ado, here's Nikkita Oliver and myself in conversation for the Worldwide Underground. Peace. I am here with my good friend Nikkita Oliver. Nikkita, how are you doing?
What's good, fam? I'm doing good, especially because I'm in space with you. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise. I think the number one question on everyone's mind when it comes to you is like, what are you doing these days, and where are you?
Where
As much
in
as
the world?
as much as you want to share, where in the world is Nikkita Oliver?
Yeah, like Carmen Sandiego.
Right.
Just political and down for the people. Was Carmen Sandiego down for the people? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Carmen gives a little bit of cop vibes, so we're just gonna
Right.
hold that. I am still working with Creative Justice. It's really beautiful organization, grassroots org, in Seattle, Washington, that was founded out of the Noni Youth Jail movement. We're entering our 10th year. I'm really honored to be the executive director here. We're this weekend on Martin Luther King Jr. Day opening a cafe with young people that are focused on centering Black, Brown, Indigenous arts and culture workers and training young people on their labor rights and coffee and what does it mean to build safe spaces for community. So deeply invested here in this space. I live between the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, and it feels a lot like I move between these worlds that I understand are connected in me and through me, but just the organizing is so different, the context, the environment, which I think has been a really important reminder. I feel like in the Pacific Northwest, we can forget that there are places that not that that I don't want to leave people with thinking Seattle is super progressive or, hella down for everything on the left. But the Midwest, in terms of like the risk that organizers take, the lack of broad support for progressive political movements, uh, is very palpable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, over the last year and a half, just been doing a lot of thinking about what would it look like if we had more organizers that have the experience and the spirit of what I've been around in the Pacific Northwest, in the Midwest, so that you had a growing body of Black radicals there. Now, there are Black radicals there doing really important key work, but I
Mm-hmm.
think what I see is the risk is different. The state sanctioned violence is much more widely accepted, and it is swift. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of living between those two worlds, and excited to be close to family in both places, chosen family in one and blood family in the other, especially in these times of just like such great grief and also uprising.
Yeah, yeah. For people that don't know about creative justice, like as an organization, can you talk about like, what it's based on and what the work is like day to day?
Yeah, so in 2000, was it 2012, there was a levy. So I'm going to go real far back in the history to come forward, but in 2012 there was
Nice.
a levy called the Children and Family Justice Center levy that King County had folks vote on, and they made it sound like they were going to be building this place for children and families to be supported and made whole, but in reality they were building a children's jail and
Mm-hmm.
courts to prosecute kids, and quote unquote family courts to separate families. And this really dope organizer, Dee Dee, and other young people called attention to how racist and classist this project was. And even though the levy ultimately passed amongst voters over a period of about 10 years, organizers took the No New Youth Jail movement from this small group of people that the county called just like a bunch of radicals into a movement that some of the larger nonprofits and institutions have also bought into, of acknowledging that incarcerating young people, and we would say generally as abolitionists, incarcerating people, punishing people, is not the best response to generating the safety and care and well-being that we deserve, and it ultimately does not get us to safer communities. And so creative justice was directly birthed out of the No New Youth Jail movement. There were organizers at the county's arts agency who saw there's this program called 1% for Arts, that anytime a capital project is built in our county, 1% of the funds for it have to go towards arts. Usually, this is public art that we may or may not like or even understand at times.
It's 1% of tax money, right? Like the
Yeah, 1% of
yeah,
tax money. And that's such an
yeah.
important thing. Like, it's our money, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's 1% of the tax money from the levy goes to uh public art. Public art generally, I don't know about how you feel about it, but I also don't connect to what they build in our communities. Sometimes it feels pretty gentrifying.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Because I was on some of those boards where, or not even boards, what's it called? Panels, where you get to have a vote and a say, like on where money gets spent. And so many of the applicants are that apply to these things are people that want to build sculptures and not really things that benefit the public, right? So yeah.
Exactly. And but these organizers who also were working in the
Hmm.
county uh saw this money come in, and they were like, hey, what if instead of building some sculpture that maybe our communities don't understand or doesn't even reflect who we are, we took $250,000 of that and we seeded a project that
Hmm.
was doing the work using art and healing engaged spaces to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. I think you were one of the artists that in that first round of artists
No,
contributed to think. No, you weren't. Oh, you were just on my interview panel.
I was on the interview panel that hired Aaron Counts.
Got you. Okay, you were
Yeah,
on Aaron's interview panel. So,
yeah.
so prior to Aaron, who I would consider to be the founder of this
Hmm.
project being hired, they pulled to they this money got set aside. You then were on the panel to hire Aaron, who's just this amazing Black artist and writer here in Seattle who has for a long time been doing work around supporting young people and developing their arts and their voices through Youth Speaks,
Hmm.
who has also worked for a long time supporting our loved ones that are incarcerated through different projects and books. He then led a steering committee that worked with artists, families of young people who'd been incarcerated, young people who'd been incarcerated, one judge, one prosecutor, one public defender to think about what would it look like to design this project. And over the course of the planning and the work, they arrived at creative justice, which looked very different then. And they hired their first round of mentor artists to help support it. We would have 12 to 15 young people that for 12 weeks we made art with, who had active cases in the juvenile punishment system. And the goal would be that when they finished their time with us, that their cases would be dropped. What we quickly
Amazing.
found was it is amazing. And we quickly found that the courts were not so quick to drop the cases. And young people really loved the program. So they wanted more time. It wasn't for them, it became about much more than just their the criminal punishment system. It was building community. It was investing in their creativity. It was having a place to speak truth to power. It was receiving stipends and economic assistance. It was having mentor artists who are artists every day, showing them that there is a way to be an arts and culture worker and do more than struggle to survive. Like you can actually you can thrive off your work. So uh, we quickly realized that we had to create pathways where young people could stay engaged with the program, and we needed to be continued the organizing with No New Youth Jail to keep pushing the court systems, and in particular criminal punishment system, to stop prosecuting kids. Because at the end of the day, a lot of our young people are economically and politically dispossessed. They're living in communities that I wouldn't even view as under resourced. They were either never resourced in, or what resources we had have been stolen and stripped away. And then, as Black, Brown, Indigenous young people, queer and trans young people, low income young people, constantly being targeted by systems. And so the conditions around them, it was much it's become and always been much more than just dismantling the school to prison pipeline. It is changing the conditions that our communities are living in, and not doing that on behalf of young people, but doing that in partnership with young people. So over the last 10 years we have been able to grow from being just our base arts program into, we have a youth consortium where young people are doing organizing work with currently incarcerated people at the local, county, and state level. They have a zine project where they're regularly partnering with incarcerated loved ones to tell the stories of what is
Mm.
happening in prisons and jails,
Hmm.
and also like the families that are on the outs. They are working on legislation. We have a podcast where young people are speaking to other young people about things that matter to them. We have arts based healing circles that are run and facilitated by other youth and young people.
What was the name of the podcast again?
The podcast is called Recess.
Okay,
And
nice.
the idea is that young people are generating content about things that matter to them for other
Hmm.
young people. Because who better to speak to young people than young people? And who
Absolutely.
better to decide what is the content going to young people than young people? So
Right.
the podcast, we have arts-based healing circles ran by young folks. Um, we have a garden that they've built in our parking lot.
Hmm.
Uh, we we have a weekly kitchen where chefs come in and make fresh meals that young people and their families can access. We've really grown into a much more holistic and robust space because of the leadership and the voices of young people. And then this Monday, we're going to open a cafe that is
Yes.
uh, going to make the venue that we're in. We're in a building called Washington Hall that has a number of Black and Brown led organizations in it. One in particular is called Black Power Unlimited. Um, and we are partnering to make our venue on the first floor as accessible and beautiful as possible. So the cafe is the first step in sustaining this venue in the Central District for Black and Brown arts and cultural workers.
Yeah, so amazing. Um, so since its inception, right? Since I've seen Creative Justice grow from having basically one employee to to then two. Like how many people work at Creative Justice now, and how many youth does the organization like are a part of the organization, and does the organization serve?
Yeah, that's so we went from when Aaron and I were first, so there was
Yeah.
Aaron, not
Mm-hmm.
full time, uh, working on a contract. And then there was
Mm-hmm.
Aaron and I, neither of us full time working on contracts, to in 2024, we have over 30 staff.
Amazing.
Um, with about 18 of those being full time and then the rest being part time, often because they are working artists and so they have other projects they're doing, other work that they're doing. We have 4 full time fellows who were participants in the program, where the goal is to very intentionally develop their skills to take my job. Like,
Yeah.
I when we celebrate our 20-year anniversary, my hope is that it is a former participant in Creative Justice who is the executive director. It is a former participant from Creative Justice who is the education director. All the roles that currently are held by quote unquote adults from community, that it's former participants that are in those roles, running the organization. But we also know
Mm-hmm.
that to get young people to that place, we have to be intentional and investing in their knowledge and their capacity building and their relationship building, and caring for them on multiple levels so that they can
Mm-hmm.
step into those roles feeling really grounded and rooted and skilled up to
Mm-hmm.
to do this work. Because the other side of this is this organization is often attacked by the state and white supremacy. And what I'm not going to do is throw young people into the belly of the
Yeah.
beast without the right skills. So we're trying to meet the vision of this org truly being led by young people from the org with a commitment to the capacity building that it takes. And so that's why we have this full-time fellowship. We have a opportunities and fellowship coordinator or director, Moni Tep, who is building out our not just what is the pathway to leadership in this org, but there are so many other orgs in our region that young people could be skilled up to be taking over.
Mm-hmm.
So, being really intentional about that, we have 4 cafe fellows. We have a youth leadership board that has a representative from each program in the organization, and they are integral to how we make decisions. And then we have a really powerful community advisory board that has local artists and community members on it, because we really want to be deeply rooted and connected while being youth driven. And hopefully, at one point in time, these young people just take over.
Yeah, that's it right there. That to me, that's like the mark of good organizing, is when you work yourself out of a job, right? Like, yeah, and can pass it on. It's so beautiful. It's so inspiring to see. Um, yeah, I'm really excited about the cafe opening up. That was like the main reason I wanted to have you on this week, because I know it's opening up on Monday. And if it's all right, I wanted to go a little bit back in time to even how we met, because I met you as a poet and an MC before I even knew your name. You were a regular at the Fair Gallery Cafe, and I used to wonder why you didn't come to Himo more often. I was like, who are they? So we had these alternating nights. Like Cornerstone was I think every first, was it Friday or Saturday of the month, and we had Ladies First at Hidmo the same night. So it was like the same community. But yeah, can you talk a bit about your X-Men origin story as like an artist in Seattle, and how your work as an artist, as a poet, and all that has been a part of your organizing and everything you've done since?
Yes, it's also been a part of my radicalizing.
Word.
Um, you know, so I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian, non-political space, uh, and yet being a person very concerned with justice somehow, very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and moving from Indiana to Seattle, I was at this white liberal arts Christian school, that is has recently been sued by their student body for being transphobic. So shout
Mm.
out to the students for holding them accountable because that is not a new thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it was being in that space as a black, not out queer person,
Mm.
as someone struggling with gender identity in terms of what I was told who I was supposed to be. You know, at 37, I now understand I'm non-binary,
Mm-hmm.
and that the colonial society we're in has not been set up that way, or at least will not, doesn't want to honor my existence. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but at that age, I already kind of knew who I was. I just didn't have the language to articulate it. Um, but I've also always been an artist. It's always been a part of how I have stayed alive, whether that was singing
Yeah.
in church, playing viola at church. By my senior year of high school, I was in symphony, three choirs, doing various stage things. So performing in the arts has always been a space that I've loved. And in
Mm.
particular, I love rehearsal. I don't know if other people love rehearsal, but I love
Mm-hmm.
rehearsal because it's a space to experiment. You get to test your limits. Like on the stage in the performance, you do what you know you could do well because you want to deliver a good performance. But in rehearsal, you're going to test the limits of your voice. Like, how far can I push it?
Yeah.
Um, and so I've always loved rehearsal. And so when I got to Seattle. I started organizing in the South End of Seattle. And I met young people like Rel Be Free, a
Yeah.
young, dope MC here in the region who wasn't an MC yet, didn't even know he was a poet yet.
Mm.
And we started watching poetry videos together with the other
Okay.
young people in the space. And we were like, what if we started throwing our own open mics?
Uh-huh.
And the youth were like, yeah, that'd be really dope. So we threw this first event at this church
Okay.
called The Jump Off. And the Jump Off was literally just young people coming through and performing. And they loved it.
Mm.
Not a lot of people came, but they came and they supported each other. And so
Mm.
they were like, well, can we keep doing this? And there was this new coffee shop that had opened not far from us in Columbia City, um, called Empire,
Oh yeah.
and it was named in honor of the fact that MLK used to be Empire Way.
Right.
And so we were like, what if we hosted an event called Empire Nights?
Mm.
And it was both an opportunity to educate the community about how the neighborhood has changed because the light rail was being built. Gentrification was just like on 1,000% in the South End.
Yo.
And young people wanted to
Yo.
talk about it.
For the people that don't know or don't remember, when that light rail was being built down the center of Martin Luther King Way, first of all, it took like a decade, and they were digging up the street for all that time, and it made all of Martin Luther King Way look like a literal war zone. Like I had friends who had to like literally climb over dirt into a ditch over another pound of dirt to get to their front door, like on the regular basis. And yeah, it was surreal. And it's funny because the light rail is being built, still being built, like because it exists from what, like Northgate to the airport or past the airport now,
Past the
but it's
airport.
but it's still being built in all these different directions. And it's funny to see it not really impact the lives of people anywhere else in the city except for those who lived on Martin Luther King Way in that time period. So just a
One of
little
the
bit of
only
context.
places, it's
It's
one of
on
the
the
only
street.
places, yes, and it's
The only
street level, right?
place. It's the only place where it's on the street. Everywhere else, it's above ground or underground. Since it's on the street, we have more like more people getting
More
hit by the
accidents, yes.
trains. It's just yeah, it's a mess. The way they did that was a crime against the South End for real. Also,
It
for
was.
people for context, because I realize that I have listeners that aren't in Seattle, right? Like the South End of Seattle is very important to me. If you listen to the episode with Kings, it's like 2 episodes ago, we talked a lot about what makes the South End special. But Seattle is, I think the last time I saw a census report is the fifth whitest major city in the United States. But the 98118, I believe it is, which includes Columbia City, at least at that point, was the most ethnically diverse zip code. So we're a sanctuary city. We have a lot of refugee communities from all over the world. Historically
Hmm.
black community, historically native community. Of course, it's all native land. And in the South End, there was always native people in that neighborhood. but we're all just right in one neighborhood, like next door to
Yes.
each other, you know, and it makes a really, really unique um community, you know, that I grew up in, that is the Seattle that you first started organizing in. So just wanted to add that little bit of context.
No, I love that. And I think it's important because it's what was happening at that time is part of why we started the open
Mm-hmm.
mics in the first place was
Right.
young people wanted a space to talk about what was happening in a creative way, but to be political, right? And
Yeah.
art and culture is such a powerful organizing tool. And the other thing about the light rail being built the way that it stole a lot of people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
So many people lost their businesses. So it was a pretty devastating time as the city was kind of holding it as like, look at this
Mm-hmm.
development and this new transportation system. For many families in the South End, it was an
Yeah.
experience of devastation and loss.
And I didn't even mention that we're talking about Seattle doesn't have a lot of low income housing, but two of the low income housing projects in our city are on that street. Talking about
Yep.
Rainier Vista and Holly Park, and people were displaced because of this project, you know? So, yeah.
So we started Empire Nights. We're watching these videos and we talk about adding more poetry and things into it, more performance, encouraging more of them to, in addition to organizing, also perform. And the youth were like, I had this saying where I would always tell them, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I have not already done or I will not also do.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is like, like a lot of these young folks were also youth that we ran summer program with or we did other things with. So I'd be like, hey, y'all got to take out the trash. I got them off the floors. I can't ask you to do something I'm not doing. So that's the context I would use it in often. Sometimes I
Yeah.
would use it in classroom spaces that if I was giving young people an assignment that maybe felt harder, I'd always be like, hey, like, here's an example of how I did it. You know, that because in my mind, that's how you facilitate. You want people to know you've been there, you get that, you experience it. So they turned around, they used that on me. They was like, thought you said that if you was gonna ask us to do something, you would have done it or do it, and you don't be spitting poetry. And I was like, you're right.
Yo, so are you telling me right now that working with young people is what made you a poet?
Yes, in terms of like performance poetry, yes.
That's amazing. I never actually knew that.
Yeah, I mean, young people are part of the reason I do a lot of things. I wouldn't even have the job I have if it wasn't for young people. I would
Right.
not have gone to law school. I mean, there's a long list of things
And
that I
th-
would not have done without young people.
and then how old were you actually when you were, doing all this with the Empire Nights and with a young Jarrell and everything? Like how old were you?
A young person, probably 24, 25,
Okay. Okay.
maybe 23. It's in the that 23 to 25 range.
Your early 20s. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. So they're like, go do some poems. So there's a poetry slam that was happening, and I went. I read the rules, and I was like, okay, I can memorize these poems and do them within 3 minutes, and have a 2 minute poem and a 1 minute poem. Cool, cool, cool. I got it. So
Mhm.
I go and I do it, and I win.
Yeah.
My first night, I win at the Seattle Poetry Slam. So then that puts me in the finals for a competition. I win the finals and I get to go on this trip and compete. And I don't win the bigger national competition, but at that point, I'm like, wow, I'm kind of good at this. So
Mhm.
at that time, the city had a lot of open mics going in addition to the one that we were running. Like it just felt like there was 2, 3 open mics a week. You could be spitting somewhere almost every night if you wanted to be quite frank. And so
Mhm.
I had kind of my rotation, and then there were a number of open mics that me and the homies started because we would outgrow spaces or spaces would be missing something and we wanted more. And so we would plan open mics and um really my origin story comes out of communities building spaces to tell the stories that don't get told
Right.
in the voice and the way that we want to tell them, because too often our stories told through a lens or by someone else that hasn't lived them or doesn't understand them or doesn't value them or is trying to exploit them or capitalize on them. And we
Mhm.
wanted to tell our stories the way we wanted to, and we wanted to tell them with impact. So many of those open mics that we were organizing also became political organizing spaces where we would
Mm.
invite people into the various movements that we were a part of, and those movements would invite us as artists to perform at actions or be a part of events. And so it was so symbiotic in that time
Mm-hmm.
period of the way that movement and being an artist flowed for me, that it was at times it was almost indistinguishable,
Right.
which one I was doing in that moment. And
Right.
creative justice became a part of that. The No New Youth Jail movement, creative justice being art based, me being an artist, me being a lawyer, all these things
Right.
really, really, it was so uniquely in my journey a point when all the things that I felt called to synergized in a really powerful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I saw all that, and it's dope. It's dope to hear you talk about that being your experience in that era, because that was a little bit after me, coming into performing. Like for me, it was like the late 90s and early 2000s had that same energy, in the
Mm,
era of like the WTO protests, and Seattle being a center of like building global solidarity. Like that was a whole year-long process in 1999
mm,
that led to that protest. And so many of us, like, who were young artists at that time, I was 18 years old, um really learned about global solidarity, like, and what that means in a really real way. And I was in the middle of the protest freestyling with people that were zapatistas and folks from Oakland, California. And and like you, the music and the community organizing were never separate to me, so it's dope to hear that, like, 10 years later, that was still the energy. Do you think it's
mm.
still the energy now for young artists now, if they look for it or can fall into it?
Honestly, no. And
Yeah.
it's part of the impetus for wanting to revitalize our space, is
Mm,
understanding the power that comes when those things are synergized. I think there's a hunger for it, and I think a
right.
lot of a lot of young artists want it.
Mm,
Um, but especially with what has happened with COVID, uh,
yeah.
and gentrification, and how expensive the city has become,
Mm-hmm.
I think that has been a I hate to use the words perfect storm because there's nothing perfect about it other than the
Right.
conditions were right to divide and conquer. I think that a lot of those spaces that had that natural energy, Hidmo,
Mm-hmm.
um, Logos, Empire Nights, You Speaks, like all these different spaces, or Isang Mahal. I mean, the list is so
Yeah.
long where
Yeah.
there was just naturally energy around being political and being an artist. They don't
Mm-hmm.
exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because of these various elements have all contributed to us either being spread out, overworked, underpaid,
Mm-hmm.
traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
and the venues that were holding those spaces don't really exist anymore. So we, as an organization, it is so important for us that we do not lose our arts and culture focus. It is also important to us that we consistently remember that we've been birthed out of movement and that we
Right.
are abolitionists. And those are all things that uniquely have to remain situated in what we do. And so the cafe and revitalizing the venue are a part of wanting to regenerate that, because there is power in having that. And this is a moment in time, uh, that we need it more than ever.
Absolutely.
And I think for us it is organic to grow into that. It's not having to be manufactured. It is a
Mm-hmm.
literal growth and evolution out of how
Mm-hmm.
creative justice was birthed, all of the artists and folks who have given energy to it. And so I'm really excited that we have grown to this point. I'm sad that what happened in 1999 and 2012 had its limits, and at the same time excited that it still plants a seed that we believe can grow.
Absolutely. And I think that recognizing that continuity is, like, absolutely, like, so important, right? Like, I quote this thing all the time. Haile Garima said that the American empire survives by interrupting black people's continuity, right? And
Mm,
anytime somebody says you're the first, that's actually a failure, and it becomes your responsibility to find the people that did it before you so you can learn from their mistakes and build
Ashe.
and building new, not building new, realize that you're just building on, continue that work. So yeah, absolutely. Like I see the through line through things that happened way before I was, in Seattle and doing music, and through what you're doing, through what's happening at Creative Justice. Like it's all very, very connected. Um, you let me know about the Creative Cafe a little bit early on because there is an intention to honor my dear friend Rawa Hapte and the work that she was doing with Hidmo. Can you talk about that and why that's important for you and for the cafe
Yes.
itself?
I mean, it's important to me personally too.
Yeah.
Um, Rahua had whether she knew it or not, really impacted my life.
Hmm.
Um, I met Rahua at a point in time where she was both working in the city and organizing, and sometimes her role in the city conflicted sometimes with what she was doing in community. But she had such a unique ability to capitalize on the access that the city work gave her to give community more access to things we needed. And so she really impacted me in terms of like thinking about how our arts and culture work, our daytime work, um, even sometimes our work in institutions, if it's accountable to communities that have solid politics and analysis, and we're willing to leave it when we realize it has reached its limitations,
Hmm.
that there's a lot of possibility. So um, for me personally, Rahua's legacy has also shaped the way that I engage and move in the world around this work.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't come to Hidbo regularly and I couldn't make it to a lot of the events, I was constantly inspired by
Mm.
how much energy each event at Hidmo put back into the community. Like I may not have
Mm.
been at it, and this was before social media was like
Right.
as big as it is. I would always hear about what was happening or did happen in that space. Um,
Hmm.
and what I realized from that was that having central hubs like that is such an incredible way to move resource and information through our community, and then it's a place to build relationships.
Yeah.
Um, so, as Hidmo, and I'm sure you could speak more diligently to this history, Hidmo couldn't stay in the space that it was in. And so, as Washington Hall, which is a historic building here in the Central District, which is a historically Black neighborhood, and Washington Hall has been an important space for folks to have meetings, hold shows, do gatherings. A group of organizations came together to make sure that as this historical building was being renovated, because it was not accessible, it was not ADA, it needed a lot of repair. It also at that time was not serving the
Hmm.
communities that it should. There was a steering committee that was basically leading that process, and it was community members connected to various communities.
Hmm.
Um, Hidmo teamed up with Black Power Unlimited for the first floor of the building with a very committed focus on serving Black community and Black artists and
Hmm.
making sure that in this neighborhood where we were relegated to the Central District. We were redlined
Oh yeah,
into the Central
absolutely.
District, right? But as
Absolutely.
Black people always do, we were like, you know what? That's cool. We gonna make something great. And as we always make something great, white supremacy, white Southern colonialism will come in and extract it and push us out.
Yeah.
And so the folks that between Hidmo and Black Power Unlimited, they were like, we are going to cultivate a space where that can thrive, like
Yeah.
in terms of Black arts and culture workers, and a commitment to indigenous people's arts and in indigenous arts and culture workers, knowing that we are
Hmm.
an indigenous land
That's right.
and that Black liberation and indigenous sovereignty are inextricably interconnected. And that is a value that we hold. So, in the same building is also an Indigenous led organization, Voices Rising, Black and
Hmm.
Indigenous led. And then there is also a hip hop organization, Chosik Zulu, that's here, all sharing the building, all figuring out how to coexist, and all trying to figure out how do we continue to cultivate this space. But the first floor, I feel like, is such a unique space because the legacy of Hidmo and the ripple effects of what Hidmo was doing, and in my opinion, is still doing,
Mm.
is part of the reason why we've been able to arrive at this cafe.
Mm.
And it would not do justice to the space to fail to honor the legacy and the work that happened that even made it possible for this cafe and all the other things that are going to happen to exist. And that is why Rahwa's legacy, the work that she did with you and so many others, has to be honored at our
Mm,
grand opening,
love it.
because maintaining that story and that history helps us realize that it is not big moments that
Right.
do this work. It is actually consistent connection, consistent collective care, consistent commitment to each other and the mission that our ancestors have given us
Yeah.
that makes these kinds of spaces possible. They don't just happen overnight.
That's
And
right.
so I feel personally deeply grateful to Rahua and you. I think we feel collectively grateful that we get to stand on that work and see, we're taller, so we see farther, and we can
That's right.
continue to envision so much more, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Can I talk a little bit about the Hidmo? I'm gonna share some of this.
Please.
I'm gonna share some of this on Monday at the event, you know. But yeah, yeah. So I was there. I was there the first night that Rawa walked into the Hidmo on 20th and Jackson. It was an Eritrean restaurant um, in the Central District. It had a previous owner. It existed as a neighborhood spot for a long time. Um, but the night that we walked into the Hidmo, it would have been late 2006, maybe fall 2006. And me and a couple of friends, we were going to go to Misab, which was an Ethiopian restaurant, literally a few blocks from Washington Hall. It doesn't exist anymore. Um, but Rawa was in one of her moods where she was like, I don't want to go to an Ethiopian spot. Uh, and I'm not hungry, because Rawa was like that. She was just funny and could be stubborn about the most random things, you know? She was like, but I'll go meet with you if you go to an Eritrean spot. So we're like, all right, name an Eritrean spot, you know? Um, and she says, I think there's one on 20th and Jackson. Meet me up there. So we go to Hidmo. We walk in, sit down. The old owner actually looked at Rahwa and recognized both of her parents in her face. And then it wasn't that night, but the next time we came through, he saw me and he recognized both of my parents in my face as well. You know, so that night, he let us know that he was selling the business and he wanted it to stay in community. And Rawa was working at the CD Forum before this, right? She worked for the Central District Forum for Arts and Ideas. Cool side note to that. Um, when Rahua worked at the CD Forum, she organized a Black science fiction festival called Black to the Future, where
Yes, loved it.
where she befriended Octavia Butler and was like Octavia Butler's like chauffeur for a little bit, you know, would roll up to Octavia's house and take her to stuff because Octavia never drove, you know. Um, Wild. That happened before I met Rawa. I met Rawa in probably 2005.
That's
Um,
wild.
yeah. And we were like best friends. When me and Rawa met, it was like such a fast friendship. It was like my friendship with Rahwa was one where I felt like I didn't have a lot of Ethiopian or Eritrean friends that understood all of me, you know, in terms
Mm,
of like being mixed, being the generation that I am, like to be born 1981 to an Ethiopian mother in South Seattle is very rare. Like my mom is called one of the old timers in the Ethiopian community because she came to Seattle in the 1970s, and they call me one of the first kids, as in I was one of the first Ethiopian kids born in the United States, right?
oh my goodness.
So it's a real like particular experience for my age, right? So befriending Rahua and then us married and then her whole family, it was the first time like I had a whole like Habesha family that I felt like understood and accepted all of me, you know?
Mm,
And it was a really powerful, like kind of like world shaking friendship, you know? Um I say that to say we went to Masab. We didn't go to Masab, we went to Hidmo, and then we went back to Rahul and his Merit's house. I didn't have a laptop at the time. I was about to put out a mixtape. I needed to I needed to use some photo like some Adobe Photoshop, and she had it on her computer. So I spent the night at Rawa's house making a mixtape cover, literally for the Westlake '99 mixtape. Right.
stop it.
That same night, Rahua, Asamari, and me stayed up the whole night and daydreamed what we could do if they went and bought this restaurant on 20th and Jackson. And in that night, it was like, we had friends that were in Pensacola, Seattle. Was working at a community organization called CARA before that, Communities Against Rape and Abuse.
Mhm.
Um, Youth Speak Seattle was like all of our people. You know, I was literally living with Chasm, who founded 206 Zulu. He was my roommate in this time period. You know, and were just a part of like all these different community organizations that didn't always come together, and we thought, what a perfect hub, what a perfect way to connect. And also, we're thinking about
Yes.
spaces for all ages hip hop shows, and how there wasn't really any for that, particularly in the Central District. And we wanted to do all ages hip hop shows. So all of this was like imagined and envisioned in the first night, And to my surprise, Rahul and Ismarit took the conversation seriously, and they went and bought the restaurant, and made me the bartender the first night. I am the worst bartender you would ever have because I do not drink alcohol, so I don't
I
know
was
what
about to
goes in
say
your
that.
drink. My bartending career was less than one night. I had to quit quick. It's like, I'm over my head. I don't want to do this. I would make you a coffee or a tea or a chai though. Like, I had you there, but when it came to alcohol, I'm not me. But I will say that Hidmo immediately was a place where it felt like every single community I'm from existed under one roof.
Mm.
And that never existed before or since for me in Seattle or anywhere else, because it was very Central District. It was very hood, Um, it was very East African. Um, a lot of my Black feminists and Filipino feminist organizers, that became their spot, And it was all these worlds and communities that we're a part of that don't necessarily come together, that came together every single day over something as simple as food and music.
Yes.
And it was never a nonprofit, and because it was not a nonprofit, I feel like it succeeded where a lot of nonprofits fail at bringing people together, because Hidmo was not accountable to founders. It was accountable to the people that came through the doors. And through that, they were flexible enough to meet the needs of whoever came through their door for whatever it was.
Mm.
Um, yeah, Rawa was, man, she meant so much. So that little vision that we had about it being an all ages hip hop venue, Dakota Camacho is actually the person who organized the first all ages hip hop night there. And Dakota came in asking if he could do it. Dakota was still maybe in middle school or probably high school
What?
at that point. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Moni was there too, like every day. And they were in high school, and there was middle school kids from Washington Middle School that would like come every day like it was a safe place for them.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, Dakota organized the first one and just walked through and said, I have an idea. Can I do this hip hop night? And it was this night called Hip Hop Period. But Dakota didn't know that that's exactly why we wanted to have this spot. And I bring that up because this is an interesting like story about Seattle, that historically our music has been under attack by the police in a way that's not talked about. Um, so going back to my childhood, right, in like 1984, they made breakdancing illegal in Seattle, Washington. I don't know if the law is still on the
I
books.
did not know that.
Yeah, no, they actually made breakdancing illegal because it was that popular. And anything that gets a whole lot of youth of color together is seen as a threat, right? So another thing that they've done ever since is, if there's any violence near a venue that does any kind of hip hop music, because that's the music that, young people of color gather around, they blame it on the hip hop music. They blame it on that night. They will
Yep.
target that club. Um, it's always been a thing. Like when I came into this hip hop scene, like people were organizing against it in the 90s. Um, so I say that to say, when Rawa took over the Hidmo, the police paid her a visit, and the police said, "You can do any kind of music you want to do here, but don't do any hip hop."
They still do that stuff.
And yeah, and this was, what was this? It would have been 2006. So she listened to the police. I mean, but she did it anyways, basically. And sure enough, the police would harass her, and
Mm.
she valued community so much to the like she sacrificed her business for young people to have a hip hop space, because Hidmo, for the just the way it was, like there was a bar that was a separate room from the room that was the bigger room where the restaurant and the miniature hut was, which we used as a stage. So you could have a bar. The bar was a separate room, right? Because the police were coming through and harassing on nights that she would do hip hop shows, she ended up just shutting the bar completely down anytime she did an all ages hip hop show. And that was just what she had to do because the police were coming
Mm,
through, just randomly carding everyone, or they would come and just be an intimidating force. Like they would put their lights on into the through the windows and
mm,
just stare at us from their cars. Like it was constant harassing. And Rahwa did it anyways at the expense of her business. So,
wow.
man, so much love to her. And I love that y'all are continuing or building on that legacy. Um, Hidmo did close after four years and some change. I think it was like 4 years and 2 months to be specific. And the move was always to move into Washington Hall. Like that was the intention for all the Hidmo energy to go up in there. By that point, our friend Heidi Jackson had taken over a lot of the day to day, managing the restaurant itself. Rawa, like you said, was working at the city. Esmerit had been working in hospitals. So, people were at just different transitions in their lives. And also Hidmo made that shift when everyone moved into Washington Hall into being a nonprofit organization, and that bumpy road of learning how to operate as a nonprofit when that it never was before, right?
Yeah.
Uh, um, so yeah, I think it's been a really bumpy ride, but it's just beautiful to see that legacy continued. And just one more thing I want to say about it is all of the anchor tenants that you mentioned, Voices Rising, 206 Zulu, they didn't have a space before Washington Hall, so they all used to be in Hidmo. Like it was all like we were just all under one roof before. So to me, it's something beautiful and poetic about those organizations actually being under one roof now. You know,
Yeah.
and
And to
yeah,
tie in, my very first session as a mentor artist with Creative Justice, our community action project, our final event that our young people did was in the building Hidmo was in. It wasn't
oh, and
Hidmo anymore at the time, but that's
Jamrack,
where, yeah, that's where we did our closing session. And so I feel like that
yeah,
energy has continued to just keep moving. And I feel very much so like Rahwa and that work, that energy is present in this new evolution of things.
yeah.
So I'm grateful to hear that story, and I can't wait to hear it again on Monday.
Yeah, I'll add some spice to it that day.
That was great. That really warmed my heart.
Yeah, yeah. And shout out to Henry Luke. I know there's some art gonna be up in there. Yeah, I'm so excited to see the space. And thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've continued to do. And yeah, I'm just so deeply appreciative of your friendship, of your art work, your working community, all of it. What's on the horizon for you? I know it's, continuing with creative justice, but is that like all your energy right now? Are there some creative things you're working on? Like.
I see the eyebrow nudges, the nudge nudge.
No, just curious.
Um, this artist named Gabriel Teodros, who is starting to make beats and things, has
Oh, bet.
graciously sent me some tracks.
Nice.
I think what's been really challenging is balancing the arts administrator, arts organizer with the artist and
Right.
wanting to create. I think also running for office in 2017 and 2021, which is a whole nother part of my journey.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it was a part of my journey I chose as much as it
Mm-hmm.
was like it was also very driven by community. Those things have, they're beautiful things in terms of, I think, the things that have come out of them, but they also have not allowed me the space to be a creative and to do that thing that I love, to
Yeah.
rehearse, to
Yeah.
make new things, to perform. Just this the on January 1st, performing with you at the Pro
Chicago.
Palestine
Yeah.
event in Chicago. Uh, it really reminded me how much I love pulling together my political work and my organizing work with my creative work, and how much less draining
Mm,
organizing is when I'm also being an artist. And
mm,
so
mm.
I'm hoping to put out an EP by the end of the year. I'm hoping to write poems and lean into creativity. I honestly, real talk, I need that to stay alive.
Yeah,
Um, because the political work and the nonprofit work without the creativity as my foundation, it's just so draining because nonstop you're interacting with these white supremacist capitalist systems that were never meant for us. They're not intended for us. They're not meant for the planet. They're constantly extracting and exploiting, and I feel like we spend so much energy um, defending against them. And the thing I love most about being a creative is the ability to speak truth to power and to imagine the world that we want to live in and articulate that through our craft.
that's right.
That fills me with, like, it helps me get up in the morning. It allows me to sleep at night. It gives
Mm-hmm.
me peace in moments that are chaotic and don't have peace. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm hoping that over this next year, I can lean back into that call of those young people of don't ask me to do something you ain't doing.
Yeah,
Uh, and as we're asking our youth to create and heal through creativity, I need to create and heal through that creativity. The last uh, 7 years,
yeah,
2017 to now, have probably been some of the most formative and simultaneously traumatizing that I've been through in my whole life. And
right.
so leaning into my creativity and my artistic practice is scary and
Mm,
exciting.
mm.
And I'm looking forward to just making stuff.
Yeah, let's go. Let's make music, you know. Um, I wasn't even gonna touch the political side, but since you mentioned it, like, that run that you have for Seattle mayor, like it made history, like I have that image of you that artist did on the cover of the Seattle Weekly, like wearing the kufiya, like, as the weekly endorsed you for mayor of Seattle, like burned into my brain. You know what I mean? Like it's just so historic. But being close friends with you through that whole time period, like I saw the toll that it was having on you, and also like bringing it back to Rahua, seeing the toll that working in the mayor's office had on her, back in the day. Like that was something that I don't know if she ever healed from, before
Yeah.
she passed away. you know um it's such a particular kind of draining when you're trying to navigate through this system you don't believe in, because communities put all this responsibility and expectation on your shoulder. And as politicians, I mean, and you never wanted to be a politician, you know what I mean? But to have that kind of expectation thrust upon you in a way that I don't know if people ever like stopped expecting things of you that aren't human. You know what I'm saying? Like yeah, it's a lot of weight to carry, and it's a weight that I don't think is fair that people put on your shoulders regularly. You know what I mean? So I'm very happy to hear you talking about healing work. I know it's something that you've needed for a really long time, and I don't know. I just want to encourage you to keep healing and keep taking that space, and know that it's not selfish to take that time to heal, because your spirit needs us and we need you, alive and
Mm,
full intact, in this world.
Ashe. Yeah, and I think, Rafa's story informs that, I think, for a lot of us,
Right.
making the time and the space to heal. Um, she was such a fighter in so many ways, and at the same time, um, I do see the toll that community expectation put on her, and I see it
Hmm.
on other people, and I see it in myself. Um, and I don't necessarily resent those expectations,
Right.
and at the same time, this is why I think telling whole stories is so important.
Yes.
Is our liberation never can be achieved by any single moment or single person or figurehead. Our liberation will literally only be achieved through our collective care, our collective organizing, our collective fight, our collective struggle, and our collective
Hmm.
commitment to getting to that world that we know we can live in. And so I think part of my healing journey, part of being a creative, is working towards continuing to paint that picture of the collective doing the work.
Yeah.
And what does it look like for part of that work collectively to be healing, to be creating? It can't always just be fight.
That's
And I
right.
think we've really been trained by the version of the story we've been told to one, believe that it's always just fight, to forget the importance that as much as we need to dismantle things, we have to build things. And there's so much life in building things. And we've
That's right.
also been told it's just the select, talented few. And that is the worst lie that we could
Mm-hmm.
ever give into. So
Mm-hmm.
as we like move into cultivating this space, I do hope that it is cultivating those collective approaches to what we do, which is why this is a partnership between us and Black Power Unlimited. It's not us taking over the space. It is a partnership of these two organizations
Mm-hmm.
because both orgs bring so much into the ability to make this sustained.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do think my 2024 is about healing and creativity,
Let's go.
um, and about making sense of a lot of things
Yeah.
before this moment.
Yeah.
Um, but that is what performance poetry has always been for me, is
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity to make sense of things, to make beauty out of ash, to take really terrible moments and turn them into something really beautiful. And I lost track of that for a long for a grip of time, but
Yeah.
with homies like you, having constantly being called back into it. So if there's anything that'll help folks get out of this podcast and this conversation, it
Mm.
is the value of our collective stories, our collective
That's it.
legacy, our creativity, and its power to heal, but also its power to manifest. Because what good is it to be an abolitionist if we're not also dreaming of what is it going to be like when we get beyond prisons and police and punitive systems and oppression? And that is why creative justice is so powerful to me, is young people collectively imagining and creating the world they want to live in. And instead of um, the labels and the oppression that often is put on them in all these systems being the final word, they're actually getting to take those layers off, and they are the final say. They are the painter, they are the dancer, they are the musician, they are the poet, and that is power. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be a part of that and to have gotten to share about it on your podcast.
Let's go. Yo, what's the best way for people to support all the work that you and Creative Justice have coming up?
Yes, if you're local or in the region, Seattle, King County, Pacific Northwest, I hope that you'll slide through the cafe. If you want to host a show here,
Mm.
we are revamping the first floor venue so that it is cost wise more accessible. Hosting your shows here, visiting the cafe, having meetings or conferences here are great ways to continue on that energy of this being a community hub. If you are an arts or culture worker that has things that you want to have in this space, we have a goal of hosting markets or seeing folks being able to be collectively strong in our economics. How do we move our resources amongst each other? Let's connect and talk about what we can bring here that does that. As we're in the midst of all these boycotts, and please keep up the boycotts because they do work
Yes.
when we are consistent and committed. We need to be spotlighting, amplifying, going to our local businesses. And so, why not put our money back into these spaces and never put them back in these corporations that are always going to be terrible and shitty? So,
Mm-hmm.
if you have ideas or things that you think should be in a space like Washington Hall, come here, support them, build with us, organize with us. And then, Creative Justice NW on Instagram. Uh, you can also find us on Facebook. We have a website, www.creativejusticenw.org. I'm not going to lie, we'll always take donations. So if you got some money in your pocket and you want to support, we appreciate that. Uh, a lot of what we raise goes back into young people's pockets, whether that's through stipends, jobs, rental support, food support, healthcare support. So I feel blessed to be able to authentically say you can actually trust that we're putting that money back into our team and the young people in the space. And the beauty of our team is all Black and brown folks, all people impacted by the criminal punishment system or other systems like the immigration system and all the injustice that's also in that system. Um, we are authentically a space that is working to make sure that we are stewarding what comes in and what goes out. So come through. Let's make art.
That's what it is. Nikkita, thank you so much. It's been a joy and a pleasure having you here on the Worldwide Underground. And can't wait to see you on Monday.
Yeah.
I want to thank my friend Nikkita Oliver once again for joining us on the podcast. We hope to see you if you're in the Seattle area this Monday, January 15th, over at Washington Hall for the grand opening of the Creative Cafe. If you're not in Seattle, or if you're just listening to this after January 15th, 2023, we know good conversations can be timeless. You can always tap into creativejusticenw.org. Again, that's creativejusticenw.org to find out about everything that Creative Justice has going on. GabrielTeodros.substack.com is where you sign up for the mailing list. I'll be putting out exclusive mixes, future podcast episodes, and all that. It's all up there on the Substack. And thank you all once again for tuning in, for supporting this podcast. It's a completely experimental endeavor. I'm having fun with it. I hope you are too. And we'll see you in the next week or so. Peace. Oh yeah. And if you want to hear the actual version of this song, to this instrumental that you're hearing in the background, it is Nikkita and myself going back and forth on the new album, From the Ashes of Our Homes. I gotta do a better job of promoting my music. It's a good album, and I made the beat myself. Go listen to it if you haven't yet. If you have, hey, appreciate you.